Am I the a-hole for telling my husband that his affair child is not welcome in our home, and if he wants custody, he will have to move out? My husband and I have been married for 9 years. For the first few years, I genuinely believed we were the exception to the rule. We had this quiet, rhythmic life that felt untouchable. We knew the sounds of the house, the way the floorboards and the hallway groaned if you stepped too close to the linen closet, and the specific way the light hit the kitchen table in the late afternoon. I thought I knew the man I was sharing that space with. I thought our history was a straight line of loyalty and shared goals. But in 2021, that line snapped. It didn't happen with a scream or a confession. It happened with a man in a windbreaker knocking on our door and handing over a stack of legal papers. My husband was being sued for child support. The physical sensation of reading those documents is something that has stayed under my skin for years. It's a specific kind of cold, the kind that makes your teeth ache. I sat on the edge of our bed, the same bed where we'd slept for years, and looked at the dates. The math didn't lie. This child was conceived shortly after we were married. While I was still writing thank you notes for our wedding gifts, while I was still feeling the weight of the new ring on my finger, he was out with someone else. He was building a secret that would eventually grow into a human being with a legal claim to his time and his money. It nearly ended our marriage. I didn't cry much at first. I was too busy feeling the vertigo of my entire reality shifting. The man I loved was a fiction. The life we had built was a cover story. We went to counseling together because I needed to understand if there was even a shred of the man I thought I married left inside him. It wasn't about forgiveness in those early days. It was about inventory. What was real? What was a lie? I agreed to stay in the marriage, but I wasn't going to be the wife who absorbed the blow for him. I wasn't going to be the person who made his life easier after he had made mine a nightmare. I stayed with very specific, non-negotiable provisions that were carved into the foundation of our new marriage. First, my husband was to get a second job. Since we have been together, he has never had a full-time job. He's always moved from one thing to another, never quite finding a career path that stuck. I had always been the one with the steady, full-time career, the one providing the health insurance and the stability. I told him that his child support payments, his legal fees, and every single cent associated with his child would not come from our household budget. My hard-earned money would not be used to facilitate the fallout of his betrayal. He had to work for it himself. Second, I made it clear that at no point in time would I ever consider having a relationship with this child. I have absolutely zero interest in this kid. I know people say the child is innocent, and in a vacuum, that's true. But in the context of my life, that child is the physical evidence of the worst thing that ever happened to me. I told him that if he wanted to pursue a relationship with them, that was his choice, but it would happen entirely outside the walls of our home. I would not be a stepmother. I would not be a friend. I would not even be a witness to it. So for the past 3 years, that has been our reality. My husband has been working 2 part-time retail jobs. He averages about 40 to 50 hours a week across both of them. For some people, that sounds like a lot, but it's just a standard work week for most of the adult world. He comes home tired, his feet hurt, and he smells like the stockroom of a big box store. I don't feel bad for him. This was the price of staying. He's been getting to know the kid over the past couple of years, but it's been a very controlled, very distant process. He currently only has supervised visitation. They see each other once or twice a month for a couple of hours at a community center or a park, always with a social worker present. I don't ask about those hours. I don't ask what the kid looks like or what they talked about. When he comes home from those visits, I expect him to leave that persona at the door. Inside our house, it's just us. Or it was. Recently, my husband came to me after one of his shifts. He didn't even take his shoes off. He sat down on the sofa, looking heavy and gray, and informed me that there was some baby mama drama. Apparently, the mother of the child has to self-surrender in May and is going to be incarcerated for 8 months. I didn't ask what she did. It doesn't change my life whether she's in jail or on the moon. Then he said it. He told me that he needed to take custody while she is locked up. He explained that if he doesn't, the kid will have to go to their grandparents, who live on the opposite coast. He started talking about the kid's stability. He said the kid doesn't want to have to change schools. They don't want to be so far away from their friends, their dad, or their mom, since she'll be doing her time in a facility that's fairly local to us. I sat there and watched his mouth move. I watched him try to appeal to a sense of fairness that he had forfeited years ago. He was looking at me like I was a solution to a problem he created. He was looking at our home like it was an available resource for a situation I had explicitly excluded myself from. I didn't argue. I didn't give him a dramatic monologue about how much he hurt me. I didn't even raise my voice. I just got up, grabbed my keys, and walked out the front door. I went to the grocery store on the corner. I didn't buy food. I went to the rack by the entrance and grabbed a copy of our area's apartment guide, the one that lists all the studios and one-bedrooms in the nearby zip codes. I went back home, walked into the living room where he was still sitting in the exact same spot, and handed it to him. He looked down at the booklet, then back up at me. "Are you serious?" he asked. "I still feel the same way as I did 3 years ago," I told him. He said he didn't think that was fair considering the extenuating circumstances. He started talking about how it's an emergency and how any decent person would step up for a child in need. I told him I don't care about the circumstances. I don't care about the school district or the friends or the grandparents on the other coast. I told him, his kid is not welcome in my home. If you want to take custody, I will grant you an amicable divorce, but I am not changing my mind. I am not taking care of some other chick's kid. The silence that followed was dense. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he doesn't. The woman he married 9 years ago might have been moved by a story about an uprooted child. But that woman died in 2021 when the process server rang the doorbell. Since that conversation, the house has felt like a waiting room. He's still here, going to his retail jobs, coming home, and eating dinner in front of the TV while I read or work in the other room. He's moping. He's making these long, drawn-out sighs every time I walk past him. He's waiting for the guilt to set in. He thinks that if he stays quiet and looks miserable enough, I'll eventually soften. He thinks I'll realize that 8 months isn't that long. But 8 months is an eternity when you're sharing your bathroom, your kitchen, and your sanity with the personification of your husband's affair. I'm not doing it. I am not going to be the one who cooks for this child, or does their laundry, or drives them to the school they are so desperate to stay in. If my husband wants to be a full-time father, he can be a full-time father in a different house. Edit. I've seen people commenting about how I'm cruel for making him work 2 jobs. Again, he has never had a full-time job. He works 40 to 50 hours a week. Most people call that having a job. The fact that it's 2 different retail places doesn't make him a martyr. It makes him an adult who has to pay for the consequences of his actions. I'm not a whipcracker. I'm just not his benefactor anymore. And for those who think I should be the one to file for divorce, no. Why should I? I'm not the one who wants to change our living situation. I'm perfectly content with things staying exactly as they were for the last 3 years. I like my house. I like my routine. I am not the one who created this crisis. If he wants to pursue custody, I have told him I will not fight him on the divorce. I will make it as easy and amicable as possible. But I am not going to waste my own time, energy, and money to do the legal legwork for him. He is responsible for getting his own ducks in a row. That includes being the one to go through the headache of filing. He's looking at the apartment guide, but I can see him checking the prices and then looking at his paycheck. He knows he can't afford a decent place on his retail wages while also paying child support. That isn't my problem. He should have thought about the cost of a second life before he started one. He's currently stuck between a rock and a hard place. If he stays with me, his kid goes to the other coast. If he takes the kid, he loses his lifestyle, his home, and his wife. He keeps trying to find a third option, a way to have both. He keeps trying to find a crack in my resolve. He'll mention a specific detail about the kid's school project or how scared the kid is about their mom going away. I don't blink. I don't offer a word of comfort. I'm not being a mean person. I'm being a person with boundaries. I spent years being the nice wife who supported him while he drifted through part-time jobs. I was the nice wife who tried to make it work after he cheated. That version of me is retired. I am not moving out, and I am not letting that kid move in. So, am I the asshole? Update. After I posted, things didn't calm down the way I expected. If anything, it forced both of us to actually sit down and deal with what we had been circling around for days. There wasn't any avoiding it anymore because the situation had already reached a point where something had to give. We went back to the same conversation, but this time it wasn't reactive or heated. It was more direct. I told him again, clearly, that my position hadn't changed. I am not willing to live with a child, and I am not willing to adjust my life to accommodate one. That part of the conversation didn't drag out because there was nothing new to say. He already knew where I stood, and repeating it wasn't about convincing him. It was about making sure there was no confusion or room for interpretation. From there, the discussion shifted into what that actually meant in practical terms. Divorce came up right away, but it wasn't framed as a threat. It was just part of the reality of the situation. We talked about separating temporarily as well, but even that didn't solve the underlying issue. The problem isn't proximity or needing space. It's that our lives are moving in completely different directions if he decides to take on a parental role in a full-time way. The financial side of things was something we hadn't fully gone into before, and it needed to be addressed. He has never been involved in the planning or management of our finances, so I laid everything out for him. I showed him what the household actually costs, what our fixed expenses are, what's discretionary, and what he realistically contributes versus what he would be responsible for on his own. There wasn't any exaggeration or pressure. It was just numbers. Rent, utilities, groceries, insurance, everything that adds up quietly in the background. When it's written out in front of you, it's harder to ignore. He had to look at what he currently earns, what he spends, and what taking custody would mean on top of that. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about reality. I also told him something that I hadn't said as directly before. I told him that while I do love him, I wouldn't fall apart if we divorced. That doesn't mean I want it. It doesn't mean I'm hoping for it. It means I'm not going to stay in something that no longer works just to avoid the discomfort of leaving. That hit him harder than anything else we talked about. He broke down in a way I haven't seen before. Not the kind of reaction that comes from frustration or anger, but something more raw than that. There was a lot of emotion there, and for once it wasn't directed outward or turned into an argument. He kept coming back to the same thing, that he didn't want to lose the marriage and that he still sees our life together as his priority. It wasn't one-sided either. That conversation wasn't easy for me, and I didn't come out of it unaffected. There's still history here. There's still attachment. We ended up sitting there for a long time without trying to push the conversation forward, just letting it be what it was. He asked if we could go back to counseling, and I agreed. It made sense to have someone else in the room who could keep things grounded and make sure the conversation didn't just loop back into the same points over and over. We scheduled an appointment and went together. The discussion there didn't introduce anything completely new, but it did bring a level of clarity that we hadn't reached on our own. With someone else guiding it, things didn't spiral or get sidetracked. What came out of that session was that he's overwhelmed in a way that goes beyond just this situation. There's a lot tied up in how he views himself and what he thinks he's supposed to do versus what he actually wants. Becoming an active parent in a full-time sense isn't something he had been working toward or preparing for. Up until now, his involvement has been limited, structured, and controlled. He admitted that he doesn't actually want to step into that role, at least not in the way this situation would require. At the same time, he feels like he should want it, and that conflict is what's been driving most of his reactions. There are other layers tied to that, including family expectations and how he was raised, but it's not something that can be unpacked in one conversation. The counselor pointed that out pretty clearly and recommended that he start individual therapy. Not as a suggestion for later, but as something he needs to do if he wants to figure out where he stands without outside pressure shaping his decisions. So far, he hasn't followed through on that. He hasn't refused, but he hasn't taken any steps toward it either. What had become clear to him during that session is that he isn't in a position to take full custody right now. Not mentally, and not financially. It wasn't framed as a judgment. It was just an acknowledgement of where things stand. Because of that, the plan for the child changed. Instead of staying here, the child is now with their maternal grandparents in Virginia. It wasn't the outcome he originally wanted, but it's what ended up happening given everything else. He had made plans to go visit for their birthday this weekend. The trip was already set, and I didn't interfere with that. I actually helped where I could. I transferred some of my airline miles to cover his ticket and made sure he had what he needed before leaving. It wasn't about making a statement. It was just something practical that I could do. The night before his flight, he was home late and stayed up longer than he should have. I had plans the next day and left early, so I wasn't there when he was supposed to get up and head to the airport. He overslept and missed the flight. There wasn't any way to fix it last minute. Tickets were too expensive to rebook on short notice, and he couldn't afford it. The trip didn't happen. He's been in a bad mood since then, which isn't surprising. It's one thing for plans to change because of circumstances. It's another to miss something like that because of your own choices. Right now, he's mostly keeping to himself and trying to distract himself however he can. There hasn't been another big argument or discussion since then. It's more of a quiet tension than anything else. On my end, life hasn't stopped. I had plans already set for today, and I didn't cancel them. My sister and a few friends are coming over later, and we're doing a salsa canning day that we've had planned for a while. It's not related to everything that's been going on, but it's something normal in the middle of all this. I'm not expecting everything to settle overnight. There are still unresolved pieces, especially around what he decides to do next and whether he actually follows through with getting help for himself. For now, the situation has shifted enough that it's not as immediate as it was before, but it's not over either. That's where things stand at the moment. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Daily Tales Update.